Hi there, I'm Kelly Kobe. I'm an investigator within the Center for Journalology here in Ottawa. I want to start off by welcoming you here today and also for thanking you for making the time to join us in our first speaker series. So what you're joining today is the kickoff of the 2021 Center for Journalology Speaker Series. So this is our first session, but there's 4 sessions planned throughout the calendar year. Before I jump in and introduce our lineup of speakers today, I wanted to just say briefly that for those of you who are not familiar with the Center for Journalology, as I said, we're based in Ottawa, Canada. We're a really diverse group. We've got a lot of different interests. Some topics that we're currently studying include incentives and rewards in academia. We also study predatory journals. We've studied the implementation of open science practices and other topics like reporting guideline development, use and implementation. We're a really diverse group in terms of the folks that make up the center as well, and I think that's one thing that I really enjoy about working there is that we all come from very different academic backgrounds, which really, I think, enriches the perspectives we bring to our journalology work. Okay, so for today in our first session of the speaker series, we actually have 4 of our awesome team members who are going to update you on some of the research they've been doing or some of the research they're about to start conducting. And, obviously this past year, we haven't had the same opportunity to attend conferences as we have in previous years. So we thought this would be a great way to share some of the research that our own center is doing. So without further ado, I'm going to kick off by introducing first our first speaker, Dr. Alicia Caulley. If you've not had the opportunity to meet Dr. Alicia Caulley yet, you'll be excited to do so today. Lisa has an impressive track record. She presently is a practicing otolaryngologist here at the Ottawa Hospital, and she's also actually completing her PhD in the Netherlands presently, and has an appointment as a clinician investigator in the Ottawa Hospital Research Institute. I'm really excited to hear Lisa's talk today, which is entitled Impact and Use of Reporting Guidelines, a Citation Analysis. So I'll hand it over to Lisa now.
Good afternoon. My name is Alicia Caulley, and I'm one of the associate scientists at the Ottawa Hospital Research Institute and the Center for Journalology. Today, I'd like to present some of our research looking at reporting guidelines using citation analysis. Reporting guidelines are designed to advise authors, reviewers, and editors and aid in the reporting of research objectives, methodologies, and results. They provide a stepwise checklist to ensure the clear and transparent reporting of research, to minimize bias to readers, and optimize generalizability of study findings. Many authors are unaware of the growing collection of resources available to improve the quality of reporting studies, including over 400 reporting guidelines. These reporting guidelines are available in the web-based library of the Enhancing the Quality and Transparency of Health Research Network, or the Equator Network. We attempted to evaluate the current status of the use and impact of reporting guidelines, as well as the contributing factors to their use through this citation analysis. Citation analysis is a widely accepted method of evaluating research impact by establishing the number of times a particular article is cited. It acts to establish the impact that a particular work has had by identifying which other authors based their own work upon it or cited it within their own papers. It allows researchers to learn more about a field or a topic by identifying seminal works in that area. It also allows authors to quantify their impact within their own discipline. Finally, it can provide authors with information that can increase their exposure and awareness of their work in order to reach a wider audience. This current citation analysis focused on determining the citation rate of reporting guidelines, as well as the factors contributing to their citation performance. We also evaluated the appropriate use of reporting guidelines for major study designs. In order to determine the citation impact of reporting guidelines, we analyzed all reporting guidelines listed in the Equator Network. The reporting guidelines had to have been published in English for a minimum of 5 years at the time the study was initiated in order to be included in the primary analysis. For this study, that meant that reporting guidelines had to have been published prior to 2013. All reporting guidelines were then searched in the Web of Science database in order to determine their citation performance. In addition to extracting key information about their citation, we also extracted information regarding how these reporting guidelines were published, including whether they were published in multiple journals, the journal impact factor, the journal field that it was published in, whether or not the journal was open access, and the gender of the first author. Of the 296 reporting guidelines included in the analysis, the reporting guidelines were cited by a total of 100,465 articles since their publication. Only 2 reporting guidelines were never cited. On average, each reporting guideline was cited approximately 37 times. The most cited reporting guideline was the preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analyses, or the PRISMA statement, particularly when it was published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, receiving over 8,000 citations. From this figure, we can see that the citation performance of the PRISMA guidelines significantly exceeded that of other reporting guidelines of major study designs. When we looked at the factors that contributed to the citation performance of these reporting guidelines, we found that there were several key factors that contributed to citation rates. For example, at each fixed value of journal impact factor, we found that reporting guidelines with male first authors accumulated more 2-year citation counts than those with female first authors. Similarly, publication after the launch of the Equator Network statistically contributed to a higher citation rate at 2 years than those published before the launch of the Equator Network. In the regression model of factors that contributed to 2-year citation counts of the reporting guidelines, we found that open access to the individual reporting guideline had the greatest effect on citation counts. In addition to this, journal impact factor, publication in a general medical journal, and multiple publications also contributed to the citation performance at 2 years, in addition to a male first author and publication after the launch of the Equator Network. Similar findings were observed in our 5-year citation analysis as well. Publication after the launch of the Equator Network only had a significant effect on 2-year citation rates. In order to evaluate use of reporting guidelines, we adapted the methods of a 2010 bibliographic study of observational studies citing the Strobe statement, as the extent of appropriate or inappropriate use of reporting guidelines for other major study designs, including systematic reviews, economic evaluations, randomized clinical trials, and preclinical studies in animal research had not previously been performed. We chose this as an opportunity to evaluate the use of the PRISMA guidelines, the Consort, Arrive, and Cheers guidelines. In this study, we analyzed all articles citing these major reporting guidelines and categorized their use of the reporting guideline. We selected at random 50 articles that cited the Arrive guidelines, the PRISMA guidelines, the Consort guidelines, and the Cheers guidelines to give us a total of 200 articles citing these major reporting guidelines to be analyzed. Each of the 200 articles citing these reporting guidelines were categorized according to their use of the reporting guideline, as specified in the article itself. Use as a reporting guideline was categorized as appropriate use. The criteria for classification as inappropriate included using the reporting guideline as a methodologic guide. That is to say, the article cited the reporting guideline as a guide for research design or conduct. In addition, use as an assessment tool of reporting quality or methodologic quality was also considered inappropriate. If an article used the reporting guideline both appropriately and inappropriately within the article, it was classified as unclear. Use of the reporting guidelines in any other format was classified as other. Across all selected citing articles, appropriate use of reporting guidelines was observed in only 39% of articles. The majority of clinical trials at 64% appropriately used CONSORT as a reporting tool. Of the health economic evaluations, 42% made appropriate use of CHEERS. The majority of systematic reviews and meta-analyses at 72% used PRISMA inappropriately. Similarly, we found that over 50% of studies involving animals inappropriately cited the ARRIVE guidelines as a methodologic guideline. As an exploratory analysis, we looked at whether there was an association between the time since publication of the citing article and publication of the reporting guideline. With the use of a multinomial logistic regression analysis, we found that there was no association between year from publication of the citing article since publication of the PRISMA, CONSORT, or ARRIVE guidelines and the appropriateness of using the respective reporting guidelines. The only association was identified in the CHEERS reporting guidelines. In our multinomial logistic regression analysis, we found that for every 1 year increase since publication of the CHEERS reporting guidelines, authors of citing articles were twofold more likely to use the reporting guideline in a way that was classified as unclear or other compared to appropriate. In summary, we found that reporting guidelines continue to be widely used, with guidelines receiving on average 37 citations per year. There are a number of factors that contribute to the 2-year and 5-year citation performance of reporting guidelines. Our findings suggest that open article access to the reporting guideline had the greatest influence on 2-year citation impact. Across all articles that we reviewed citing the reporting guidelines, appropriate use of reporting guidelines was observed in only 39%, suggesting authors require additional education in appropriate use of reporting guidelines. Additional details of the methods and results of our studies on citation impact and appropriate use of reporting guidelines can be found in our recent publications in Journal of Clinical Epidemiology. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Caulley, for that really interesting talk. It's great to hear an update on the work that you've been doing. I'm going to move on now to our second speaker in the series, and that's Dr. Robert Frank. So Dr. Frank is actually currently completing his residency in radiology at the Ottawa Hospital, as well as a PhD at the University Medical Centrum in Amsterdam. Dr. Frank actually had previous interactions with our center as a volunteer during his medical school studies, where he worked on some projects related to predatory journals. But today he's actually going to be presenting some more recent work, and his project title is Reporting Biases in Imaging Diagnostic Accuracy Research, Update on Recent Evidence. So I'll let you take it away, Rob.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for being here. I'm Rob Frank, a radiology resident working under the supervision of Dr. Matt McInnes. Today, we'll review the state of reporting bias in imaging diagnostic accuracy research based on a body of work performed by our group. I'll start by summarizing findings from several studies that we've published over the past few years, and then discuss an ongoing follow-up project that we're just wrapping up. Finally, we'll integrate all of these findings and briefly discuss their implications for the field of medical imaging. The reporting of scientific research is a multi-step process with potential for bias at various levels. Reporting bias occurs when the magnitude or direction of a study's results has undue influence on the likelihood of publication, time to publication, or number of times cited. For example, let's say 10 high-quality studies evaluate the accuracy of ultrasound for diagnosing appendicitis. Assume that half of these studies conclude that ultrasound is highly accurate, and the other half find that it's suboptimal. Now let's say that all of the positive studies are published within 6 months, but it takes up to a year for the remaining negative studies to be published. This results in time lag bias. If some negative studies are never published, this is considered publication bias. Among published studies, if positive findings are cited more often, this can result in citation bias. In all of these cases, at any given point in time, the published literature provides a falsely optimistic view of the accuracy of ultrasound. The first set of studies I'm summarizing today evaluated these 3 types of reporting bias by determining whether higher accuracy estimates or positive conclusions are associated with a higher likelihood of publication, faster publication, and higher citation rate. We limited our assessments to primary imaging diagnostic accuracy studies. Our variables of interest were Newton's index and conclusion positivity, and we also extracted citation rates as well as data for several possible confounding variables. For publication bias, we included RSNA conference abstracts and used regression models to determine the association of our primary variables with full-text publication 5 years later. For time lag bias, we included published studies and used correlation and regression models to determine associations with the time from completion to publication. And for citation bias, we also included published studies and used a regression model to determine associations with citation rate. And here's what we found. Studies with positive conclusions are published more often, published faster, and cited more often than those with negative or neutral conclusions. Studies with higher accuracy estimates are not more likely to be published, but they are published more quickly and cited more often. In general, the magnitude of effect was stronger for conclusion positivity than for accuracy. And these associations were all independent of confounding factors like journal impact factor, study topic, study design, and so on. So let's take a closer look at how publication bias can occur. Publication bias results from selective reporting of positive findings at any step between project completion and presentation or publication. With a positive result, authors might be more motivated to submit their work to conferences and journals. If rejected initially, they might be more inclined to resubmit. The opposite might be true for negative studies, where authors might bury the data for fear of wasting time on work that they assume will be rejected. Alternatively, it's possible that journals or conference reviewers might preferentially accept studies with positive findings, possibly because of a higher perceived impact or readership interest. So, how do we identify where the problem is? To start, we can simplify things by dividing the process into 2 broader levels. And say that publication bias could occur as a result of author-level factors or editorial-level factors. Preference towards positive findings at either of these levels could lead to research waste, with disproportionate waste of negative studies. Meanwhile, preferential publication of positive findings could inflate the perceived value of a diagnostic test. So, I've told you our prior work has suggested that publication bias does exist in imaging accuracy research, but we have no idea which level it occurs at. Answering this question is essential as it can help to inform targeted interventions to address this issue. So, we performed a follow-up study to better understand the role of the editorial process in the observed publication bias, if any. We also extended the scope to examine acceptance of conference abstracts. This study is currently in its final stages, so the results we'll be discussing today are truly hot off the presses. The objective of this 2-part study was to determine whether submitted imaging diagnostic accuracy studies with positive findings are more likely to be accepted for presentation at radiology conferences and publication in radiology journals. Ultimately, this will help determine the risk of publication bias at the editorial level, or by exclusion, if selective publication is more related to author-level factors. The first step was to get access to abstracts and manuscripts that had been submitted to radiology conferences and journals. We reached out to scientific leaders from 6 major radiology conferences and got 2 conferences on board, ESCAR and ISMRM. We also contacted 5 major radiology journals and succeeded to get 2 on board, Radiology and JMRI. We limited our assessments to primary imaging diagnostic accuracy studies that reported sensitivity and specificity. And we screened in reverse chronological order, aiming for a target sample size of 1,000 conference abstracts and 1,000 journal manuscripts based on a sample size calculation. Our main variables of interest, again, included Uden's index and conclusion positivity. We extracted data for potential confounders listed here, all of which have previously demonstrated some association with the reporting and dissemination of test accuracy research. We performed a multivariable logistic regression to obtain odds ratios for predicting acceptance to conferences and journals. For accuracy estimates, we evaluated the effect of Uden's index above 0.8 compared to a reference group below 0.8. For conclusion positivity, we evaluated the effect of positive studies with or without a qualifier compared to a reference group comprised of negative and neutral studies. We also controlled for any potential confounders that were deemed statistically important. In the end, we screened over 36,000 studies for inclusion in order to reach our target of 1,000 conference abstracts and 1,000 journal manuscripts. So here's what we found. Studies with positive conclusions or higher Uden's index are not more likely to be accepted for presentation at conferences. An important observation is that the submitted studies in both groups were overwhelmingly positive in terms of conclusions, and this was disproportionate to the number of studies with a Uden's index above 0.8. In addition, studies with positive conclusions or higher Uden's index are not more likely to be accepted for publication in journals. In fact, negative or neutral conclusions actually seem to favor acceptance for publication. And again, we see a disproportionate number of positive conclusions among submitted studies. So let's put this all together. To recap, the results of our previous published studies suggest that reporting bias is present in imaging research. Preferential and expedited publication of positive findings could skew the balance of the published literature, inflating the perceived value of a diagnostic test. However, in our most recent study, we found no evidence of publication bias at the editorial level, thereby suggesting that the observed publication bias probably occurs due to author-level factors. The high number of positive conclusions among submitted studies further supports the idea of author-level bias, as there seems to be a preference to submit studies with findings that can be presented as positive. This is then compounded by citation bias, which can amplify exposure to positive studies. While non-systematic reviews and practice guidelines are most at risk for biased citation practices, there's also potential for biased inclusion in systematic reviews, resulting from the recommended practice of hand-searching citations from other included studies. Overall, reporting bias can result in overestimation of test accuracy with potential for adverse patient outcomes. I also want to emphasize that conclusion positivity seems to be a stronger driver of reporting on all levels than the actual study results. Since diagnostic accuracy research doesn't use p-values or objective thresholds for positivity, authors have increased flexibility to draw positive conclusions where they may not be warranted. We actually see some signs of this in our data, where the proportion of submitted studies with positive conclusions was substantially higher than the proportion with the Uden's index above 0.8. This overinterpretation of results, known as spin, could have a compounding effect on the overestimation of test accuracy. In addressing this issue, the goal is for the published literature to accurately reflect the balance of existing high-quality evidence. With respect to citation bias, the academic community should ensure that studies are cited based on their relevance and quality, rather than favorable findings. To address publication bias, our results indicate a need to focus on author-level interventions with the goal of minimizing the stigma around perceived negative results. Perhaps just by educating authors that journals are not biased towards positive results could be encouragement enough for some not to abandon negative studies. At the editorial level, interventions such as a two-step review process, where studies are pre-accepted based on the protocol, could encourage authors to follow through on the research regardless of the results. Mandatory registration of protocols with the REB or affiliated universities might have a similar effect by increasing researcher accountability. Nonetheless, targeted intervention with these goals in mind could minimize reporting bias and improve evidence-based patient care. In the meantime, mindfulness of reporting bias by clinicians and radiologists is important to mitigate any negative downstream effect on patients. So to wrap up, I just want to acknowledge that this work was made possible thanks to generous financial support from multiple organizations and relentless work from a diverse team of investigators from various institutions over the past couple of years. All of the co-investigators listed here played essential roles in bringing this work to life. In particular, I'd like to thank Dr. McInnes for his supervision and the OHRI Journalology group for this opportunity to share our team's work. If anyone has any questions or feedback, please don't hesitate to contact me and I'd be happy to discuss. Thank you for your attention and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much for that update, Dr. Frank. It's really interesting to hear about the work that you continue to do with the center. I'm going to move on to the third talk in our series, and that is Hassan Khan, who will be speaking. We're really excited to have Hassan as part of the group. He recently joined the team as a volunteer, and he's a fairly recent psychology graduate who also works currently for the Canadian Department of National Defence. And today, Hassan will be speaking about whether or not open science has penetrated academic hiring processes. So he'll be speaking about a research project that he's just getting started on, actually, working with two other team members most actively, and that they are Elham Almoli, who is another volunteer joining us from McMaster University, as well as current doctoral student Marina Christ-Franco. All right, so take it away, Hassan.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to all who are joining us today virtually. My name is Hassan, and today I'll provide you with an update of what we've been working on here at the Center of Journalology. Before I begin, just to give you an introduction about myself, I'm currently working at the Department of National Defence, where I am I'm helping a team of researchers develop selection tests for the Canadian Armed Forces. Just this past summer, I started volunteering here at the Center of Journalology, and we've been working on a very exciting study which examines open science and academic hiring practices, which is what today's talk will be about. To start off, I'll provide a brief introduction to what open science is and what it encompasses. Then I'll give you a bit of a background information of open science and its current state. From there, I'll discuss our objective for this study, and finally talk about methodology and how we're looking to go about collecting data. Before I begin, just to note, this protocol is currently under development, and its final version can vary from this presentation. So what is open science? Many refer to it as a movement, but essentially it is a set of practices that look to increase transparency and credibility of research. And these practices can take many forms. For example, from pre-registration to registering your study protocol with the Open Science Framework and publicly declaring your research plans, to using a preprint service such as medRxiv to upload your unpublished manuscripts. It can also take the form of publishing in open access journals, and last but not least, sharing your study materials and making your data publicly available for other researchers. All these are practices of open science. With the implementation of these practices, there comes great benefits. You can improve knowledge translation, credibility of research, and increase chances of citation and publication. Now on the left, we have a researcher that many of you guys might recognize, but he seems like he practices open science. But there are many other researchers who are reluctant to practice open science. And there are many factors for this. But for this talk, I'll touch base on two of the most important factors. One is the time and cost associated with adopting open science practices. The other is the lack of incentive structures in place that promote open science. Researchers have found that early career researchers who practice open science are more likely to complete fewer projects than colleagues who use traditional methods. And this can be attributed to the additional time that is required in adopting open science practices, such as registration reports, which all come at a cost of additional peer reviews, which of course can take time. There's also an additional cost that institutions might need to bear. For instance, early career researchers or postdocs who practice open science often require more time to complete their projects, and institutions would need to employ them for longer periods of time just so they can complete their project or training. This may be a potential barrier for institutions to encourage open science practices. Secondly, there is a lack of incentive structures in place. Many institutions emphasize quantity over quality of research. The following two studies found that many institutions have relied or continue to rely on traditional methods, such as number of publications, journal impact factor, and grant funding as a method of promotion and tenure in biomedical research. So there is a clear need to evaluate hiring practices in academic institutions to determine where they stand in terms of adoption of open science. Now, there continues to be a reproducibility crisis, which has made a strong push towards the adoption of open science. There is evidence of journals such as Science and Nature that have incorporated checklists that promote open science. There are also funding agencies such as the U.S. National Institute of Health that explicitly take into consideration a researcher's plan which looks to establish rigor. There are also institutions such as the Berlin Institute of Health who have developed divisions such as QUEST, which stands for Quality, Ethics, Open Science, and Translations, which are involved in incentivizing open science practices and providing researchers with funds for costs accrued by practicing open science, such as publishing in open access journals. As promising as these incentives are, a more collaborative approach among journals, agencies, and institutions may help foster and encourage open science practices among researchers. We have already examined what criteria institutions use for promotion and tenure, but there's little evidence that examines institutional hiring practices, hence the significance of this study. The aim of this study is to evaluate the current hiring practices in academic institutions around the world for faculty positions that involve research. So how do we go about evaluating this? We will look to conduct a cross-sectional study examining job advertisement data from top 170 global institutions. Now, this is a convenient sample of university which is randomized and was previously used in a study by Rice and colleagues that has been made available to us. The inclusion criteria would include the sample of universities which were selected from the Center of Science and Technology and are based on the Leiden-Wohl ranking of universities of 2017. The exclusion criteria has yet to be determined. We're looking to decide if we should exclude non-English job postings, but at the same time, we're looking at translation software such as DeepL to see if we can find a workaround. But as of right now, no conclusive decisions have been made. In terms of process, we will start off by visiting the career and job section for each university. From there, we can filter in faculty positions and collect job postings for the past 30 days. Again, we have not decided which month or year we will focus on at this time. All job postings will be timestamped and uploaded in a PDF format to an external document. Now, in order to evaluate job postings, we have found, thanks to the Open Science Framework, a modular self-certification scheme for employers which looks to promote open science practices in recruitment. And this self-certification scheme is modeled off the Transparency and Openness Promotion Guidelines. Before we conduct this study, we will conduct training on the assessment of grading job advertisements so we have a level of agreement among reviewers. And to ensure consistency across institutions, any mention of the term that falls under the umbrella of open science is acceptable. This can include pre-registration, registration, preprints, open access, sharing data or code. Job postings will be split among 2 reviewers. Each reviewer will be responsible for assigning a level grade from 0 to 4 to each job posting. So a level of 0 would indicate the institutions have made no mention of open science, whereas a level of 4 would indicate that the institutions have made have mentioned open science as an essential qualification for the job. For data extraction, again, this is likely to change as we further develop the protocol, but for now, we would be looking at capturing the name of the institution, the location, so the country, institution type, such as public or private, faculty department, so for example, Faculty of Medicine or Department of Sociology, job type, such as assistant professor or postdoc, etc. And finally, the level of open science, which would range from 0 to 4. Now, for the data analysis, we have only considered descriptive statistics for now, but again, this could change as further progress is made on the protocol. Finally, I would like to thank the following collaborators for their support in the development of this protocol. And thank you to all for tuning in. If you have any questions or comments about this presentation, please don't hesitate to contact me by the email provided below. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the event and stay safe.
Thank you so much, Hassan, for that great talk. We're really interested in seeing the sort of results that come from this work. I think it's a really timely and important project. Okay, last in our speaker series today, certainly not least though, is Alicia Ricketts. So Alicia Ricketts joined our team fairly recently in September 2020. She moved from Newfoundland and took on a RA2 role with the team, and we've been really grateful to have her supporting the team and to support our research project looking to develop a journal authenticator tool. So I'm going to pass it over to Alicia, who will be speaking today about how we're determining patient preferences for this journal authenticator tool I mentioned.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending the first session of the Center for Journalology Speaker Series for 2021. My name is Alicia Ricketts, and I'm a clinical research assistant working at the Center for Journalology with Drs. Caulley and Lalu. My main area of work is focused on predatory journals and developing resources for different stakeholders on how to identify predatory journals. The Center for Journalology has an active program of research looking into predatory journals. Here are some examples of some of the work we've done up until today. All of our work has been research-based, as much of the work on predatory journals that has been conducted is based on editorials. So in order to track features of predatory journals over time, we first needed to know the defining features of predatory journals. So we created a three-part research program. First, we aggregated all the studies in the literature and looked at characteristics of predatory journals that the studies described. Then we took those characteristics and presented them to experts from diverse stakeholder groups like librarians, publishers, researchers, and funders. We used a modified Delphi consensus process, and in 3 rounds, stakeholders voted on whether or not they thought those features were key features of predatory journals. Finally, in April 2019, we brought together a group of people in person and agreed on a statement on what a predatory journal is. So here was the group that got together in April 2019 to come up with a consensus definition for predatory journals. This was a very international, diverse group in the terms of the organizations they represented. So this is the definition that we arrived at. So predatory journals and publishers are entities that prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship and are characterized by false or misleading information, deviation from best editorial and publication practices, a lack of transparency, and or the use of aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation practices. So this here forms the basic criteria of predatory journals. There may be other common features, but this is core to all predatory journals. So from that meeting, it was then decided that predatory journals need to be addressed. One of the ways we're addressing this is by creating a one-stop shop of resources that can be found on the Center's webpage. Work on this one-stop shop is currently ongoing. And the second way we're going to address this issue of predatory journals is by developing a journal authenticator tool. So what is it that we mean by this tool? So we envision that the journal authenticator tool will provide information about a given journal's operations and transparency practices. So stakeholders could then use this information to make a more informed decision about whether they want to interact with this journal or not. For example, if they want to read it, submit to it, or cite work published there. So the tool will be developed using a user-centered design. So here is an illustrative example of what the tool could look like. Of course, after conducting the studies that we plan to, and we hear from different stakeholders, it could very well look quite different. So we plan to use APIs to automate the tool, and we will validate the tool by hand extracting items from the journal to ensure the tool is working properly and accurately. We are employing a user-centered design strategy to ensure that the tool is developed with our stakeholders' needs and preferences in mind. To do this, we're conducting 3 separate studies with each of our stakeholder groups. So the first group that we have is patients and the public. So these are individuals with personal experience of a health issue or an informal caregiver, such as family or friends. Researchers is the second stakeholder group. This is including institutions and funders. And finally, we have publishers, so including journals, publishing societies, and related tools. So what are we doing right now? So right now we're determining values and preferences of our first stakeholder group, which is patients and the public. So our current protocol is establishing patient perceptions and preferences for a predatory journal authenticator tool to support health literacy, mixed method study protocol. This is currently undergoing ethics approval. So how are we doing this? How are we approaching the stakeholder group? So first, our project team consists of 2 patient partners who will provide a very important patient perspective throughout the project. They will provide their input as to the overall engagement plan and help co-design the survey and focus groups. And the study can be broken up into 2 parts. So first, we're conducting a cross-sectional survey of patients to gauge how they use the internet to obtain health information. So we're including all individuals who are 18 years of age or older, who are Canadian and fluent in English. The survey is purpose-built, and we're using SurveyMonkey to administer it. And we plan to recruit 300 participants from different databases. So we're going to be recruiting from the Ottawa Hospital's Patient Services Team database and Canada Health InfoWay's database. And InfoWay is one of the sponsors of this project. Part 2 of the study is focus groups. So we will be conducting a series of focus groups to consolidate results from the survey and obtain a more in-depth feedback on the look and feel of the Authenticator tool and how it may be useful to patients. So the discussion in this group will depend largely on the results that we receive from part 1. And we plan to recruit 40 participants for the focus groups. We plan to recruit them from people who have completed the survey and who have shown interest and want to be contacted about the focus groups. So we'll be conducting them using Zoom, and participants will be provided with some background information first, so they can read ahead of time in order to prepare for the focus groups. So we've created some educational videos to help our participants understand the research and publication process, academic journals and predatory journals. And you can actually view some of these videos right now on our YouTube page, so Journalology OHRI. So in these focus groups, we want to obtain information on 4 key topic areas. So first, we want to establish what content participants would like to see included in a journal authenticator tool and how it fits within their search for health information. Then we want to establish how patients want information visually displayed within the journal authenticator, so based on a review of possible prototypes. Then we want to establish how to share and disseminate a developed journal authenticator tool within the patient community. And lastly, we want to be able to know how to track the impact of the journal authenticator on health literacy of the patient community. So a broad overview of the next steps that we'll be doing is ethics approval. We plan to have full approval by the end of this month. Then we plan to launch the survey at the end of January or early February. And then we plan to conduct the focus groups between March and May. And just before I end the presentation, I just want to say a huge thank you to our sponsors of the project, so Canada Health InfoWay and to HAMO, because without their support, this project wouldn't be possible. And then a huge thank you to the project team, So everyone listed here. And then I just want to say thank you so much to our patient partners, Michael Hallis and Lori Prue. So that's it for me today. Thanks so much for attending, and have a good day.
Thank you so much, Alicia, for that great talk. We're really excited to build the Journal Authenticator tool and to have you help support that, but also to really, as you described, embed the patient voice within it to make it something that's really useful for that community. So I'm going to end off now. That's actually the last of the 4 speakers in our session today. I wanted to thank everyone who attended the session. I know there's some questions in the comments that have been made. Our team, if they've not already addressed those, will work to do so in the coming moments. Before I sign off, I just wanted to highlight our next session in the speaker series, and it's coming up relatively soon, and that will be on February 4th, again at noon Eastern Standard Time. We're really excited to be hosting 2 external speakers, so we'll have Dr. Michael Donaldson and Dr. Monica Granados, and they're going to be speaking about open access, and specifically how Canada is doing with regards to implementing and adopting open access publishing and how we compare to other jurisdictions. So thank you again for attending today, and we hope to see you at our next session on February 4th.